Hello everyone, we are here with another top 8 deck list video. I have my friend Grumple here as always. Last Sunday on April 27th, GOAT Community Italia put on GGP Milan, and we've got some sweet stuff going on in these deck lists. Not only do we have some sweet decks represented here in this top 8, but just sprinkled throughout the deck list, we have some cool stuff. It is worth noting that this tournament did cut to a top 16, but we're going to be bringing you the top 8 deck list here. However, there will be a link down in the description if you want to go check out all of the deck lists from the top cut. You have anything to say, Grumple, before we jump into this?
No, I'm just looking forward to all the spice. The Italians are so IRL focused that you always see some wacky shit.
Yeah, they do it right for sure. So getting into number 8 here, we have Warriors, and this is Alessandro Cicerello. Pretty standard looking Warrior list here. We're playing, 3 Blade Knights, 2 Kaikus. I guess the only thing that's not standard here is 3 copies of Spy in the main. So we are running 15 monsters, but we're playing a full 3 copies of Spy. Let's see, what are we cutting to make this happen here?
There's no Donnie.
Yeah, there's no Donald.
Breaker? No, the Breaker's there.
Yeah, the Breaker's here.
I think it's just the Donald. It's just the Donald, and usually you have like the 3rd Kaiku, and that way you get to 14. So it makes sense.
Yeah. So running 3 Gravekeeper Spy. Very interesting inclusion. I do actually like Spy in the main of Warriors, so I think this is a cool idea. Spell lineup, all pretty standard. Getting to the traps, we do have all 3 copies of Trap Dust Shoot. We don't have any Jar of Greeds, but starting out with our first spice of the day, maybe we have a little bit of Easy to Slay You influence starting here. We have a copy of Time Seal in the main of just a regular Warrior deck. This is not the Gumo deck.
Yeah, I think Time Seal is not as bad as people think it is. It's kind of almost like a Jar of Greed, but it doesn't mess with your monster ratio. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't hate it at all. I know there have been several, or at least a few top players who have championed Time Seal in Warriors. Just, take your opponent off their draw step, play that attrition game, and kill them pretty quickly. I think it makes a little bit of sense here, but pretty nice to see. Looking at the side deck, we do also have a little bit of spicy inclusion. I've been a champion for this card for a while. We see 2 copies of Jaugen the Spiritualist. Pretty happy to see that one.
Lots of respect being paid to Reason Gate.
Yeah, absolutely. Warrior, of course, known for having a good Reasoning Gate matchup already, but I don't hate the Jaugens here. Past that, pretty standard in the side. We do have 1 Mind Control, which we don't always see in Warrior sides, and we do have a Bottomless Trap Hole. So we have a Bottomless Trap Hole sighting here in the top 8. Love to see that.
Mind Control makes sense since you play the Spice, so you have more good targets to hit. Also, the inclusion of Widespread Ruin instead of the 3rd Saku. Like, that's been a thing that some people have been doing. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think the idea is to make your opponent think that you're playing all 3 Sakus plus a Widespread Ruin, or I don't know. I've heard people bring that up against Chaos Control to hit like specific monsters that may not be attacking. So I don't hate it.
It can also make sense against some decks that play into Dragoon, because that one can't be targeted and Widespread doesn't target. That can come up, but it's rare.
Yeah, that's very true. But starting out with a hot little Warriors list with Gravekeeper Spy and Time Seal, and we are moving on to a deck that hasn't seen a whole lot of success recently. The play rate has been pretty down, but in 7th place, we have Panda Burn. It is back. Looking at the list, we've got 1 Big Shield Gardno, we've got a couple of Des Koalas in here. Everything looking fairly standard in the main. We've got Desert Sunlight. I know Burn players have been sort of up and down on Nightmare Will in the main, but we do have 2 copies of it there. Only 2 copies of Trunade without the Heavy Storm. I think that's probably worth mentioning as well. Usually there's some sort of combination of 3. Either we're playing all 3 Trunade or we're playing 2 Trunade and a Heavy Storm. So that's kind of interesting, but fairly standard list.
Yeah, I'm not too big of a Panda Burn player, so I can't say too many things here. Honestly, it's just Desert Sunlight that's not the norm, I guess. And I think Magic Cylinder has been like not too popular in Burn, but overall this seems fairly normal.
Yeah, I've seen people relegating that to the side or cutting it entirely as well, but it's still a pretty strong Burn card. Looking at the side, pretty standard here as well. As far as I'm aware, we do have the Heavy Storm here in the side. We are opting for Barrel Behind the Door for the mirror match, but yeah, all told, pretty standard Panda Burn here. So congrats to Amaris DaCosta for getting into this top 8 with Panda Burn, a deck we haven't seen a whole lot of recently. And speaking of decks that we don't see very often. This is one that is very near and dear to my heart. We have in 6th place here, played by Filippo Casamali, we have Cat Burn. I've been playing this one quite a lot recently. This list looks quite a bit different from the ones that I've been playing. However, Cat, a very, very powerful card in the GOAT meta for sure. You just don't see a whole lot of people. I think the last few PWCQs, there have been like 1, 2, or 0 Cat players in them. So very, very happy to see Cat make an appearance here in this top 8. Looking at this list, we have 2 copies of Mindless Radiant, which is an interesting choice for the Cat Burn list. We have no Just Desserts in the main, which is a little different from what I'm used to, but everything else, pretty standard Cat Burn list here. Of course, Cat, you got to have your Last Will package with your Cyberstein and all that good stuff. We do also have a Giant Rat in the main, which is an interesting inclusion as well. Looking at the side deck, I think it's pretty interesting. We are siding into a little bit of a Panda Burn deck, which is what I usually opt for. In Cat Burn, I like that against the aggro decks. You sort of take out your entire aggro package. You bring in these Just Desserts, Nightmare Wheels, your Smash and Ground swords, your Kinetic Soldiers, all of that good stuff. And you just kind of switch up to being, you know, what we saw in 7th place. Just being a full-on Panda Burn deck. So I'm super excited to see this deck here. How do you feel about it, Grumple?
I kind of like Cat. I think it's one of my favorite OTK decks in the format. Also probably a little underplayed. I was under the impression that like when you smoke from one side from the other, like when you smoke from Cat to Panda, you usually do the other way around. I thought you always start as a regular burn deck because your game 1 is so strong, and then you get into the Cat matchup because then like spell trap removal doesn't hit you as hard. I guess that's not the case for Filippo though. How are you doing it?
I've seen it done that way as well for sure. You definitely see like, you know, regular Panda Burn side into Earth aggro and stuff like that to take advantage of the game 1. So I do like that a lot. The reason that Cat Burn sides into the Panda Burn strategy, sort of the inverse, is because it has a really bad warrior matchup. So going into Panda Burn at least makes it a little bit better. You get to bring in all of your defensive stuff, sort of stall the game out and burn them out from there. So I think it's a little less of taking advantage of your amazing game 1 and then siding out to sort of combat the hate that people might be bringing in, and more so just like a protection from your bad matchups. All right, the spice, at least for the decks, is going to be on hold a little bit here. We are moving into number 5, and we are going to be looking at another warrior list. So Alessandro Passarella here, playing a very Moxies coded warrior list. We have the 2 Jar of Greeds, of course, with only 13 monsters, just keeping it very simple, down to the backbone of warriors. Pretty standard spell lineup. We do have 1 copy of Book of Moon in here. We're playing all 3 copies of Trap Dust Shoot. Only 1 Dust Tornado in the main. And looking at the side, we've got more Moxies technology here, actually. We've got the Morphing Jar, which is a card that I love to see in Warriors. We've got the Needle Ceiling. We've got the Zing Zin Hu. Pretty standard, pretty solid, just cookie cutter warrior list here. Love it.
I love that Morphing Jar is kind of weaseling its way into most warrior lists these days. It feels like its most recent innovation. And I don't know, it's so impactful when it goes off. It can really just win games on its own.
Yeah, especially like against the turbo decks where they sit there and they kind of dirtle around with their Thunder Dragons. They build up a bunch of card advantage. They leave it all in hand, and you're like, well, I'm going to set all my cards and flip Morphing Jar, and then you just plus a billion. It's really nice to see Morphing Jar just come back into the meta at all, really, in GOAT format. Was a fixture in 2005, but has definitely waned a little bit in popularity. Good to see it back. And moving on to number 4 here, we have Alessandro Mosca, who is the only Chaos Turbo pilot in this top 8. I'm sure several of you will be happy to hear that. Taking a look at this Turbo list, we do have only 2 copies of Dekoichi. I know a lot of people are even higher on this card due to some data that we have received recently. So interesting to see just the 2 Dekoichi. We are on the 20 monster lineup. Nothing spicy going on in the spells. We do have 1 copy of Book of Moon, I suppose. Traps, we've got just 2 Jar of Greeds. We have the Raigeki breaks. A little bit different from what we saw in the Livonia top 8, where a lot of people were playing Phoenix Wing Wind Blast. We have the triple Trap Dust Shoot, and then we actually have Torrential Tribute, but no Mirror Force in the main. What do you think about that?
That's really unusual, and most people don't even like Torrent at all in the main deck for Turbo. I kind of have to agree. I think Mirror Force is just straight up better. And Torrent might not even make the 55. Like, it might not even be good enough for the side deck. I'm not really sure what the intention here is. I guess it's like a little more proactive because you can summon stuff yourself and then use Torrent on it. Where with Mirror Force, you're completely dependent on what your opponent does. But yeah, Mirror Force is definitely better than Book and definitely better than Torrent.
Yeah, interesting to see it excluded from the main. Of course, we do see it in the side here, along with 2 copies of Sakuretsu, and then we are going in on a little bit of the control package here. We do have 2 copies of Scapegoat, 2 metas, we have a Swords in the side as well, and we're seeing the Zambara and the Kinetic Soldier split again, but I think a little bit most interesting here, Mobius making its way back into the Turbo side here.
Yeah, I think I've talked about it before. I think Mobius is here for the burn matchup mainly, and they're another Raigeki break or just a Tornado is just better because it's easier to use.
Yeah, 0 copies of Tornado in this list, of course, but you know, I have been seeing more Mobius floating around here and there in the Turbo list. Maybe it's a trend, or maybe it's not. We'll have to see for future deck lists here. All right, moving on to number 3, we are getting away from Chaos Turbo, and we are going back to Warrior, and this is no regular Warrior list. We'll get to that here in a second. We are back to, well, I guess we've got 14 monsters this time, with no Jar of Greeds. We have the Spirit Reaper and the Magician of Faith in the main deck, which is the first that we've seen in this top 8. I know we saw that in Livonia, and we see that, you know, going around from time to time. What's interesting here, though, is in the spell lineup, we have 2 copies of Upstart Goblin. I know some people are a fan of that. Over the Jar of Greeds, it gives up a little bit less tempo. I think Jar of Greed is a little bit more versatile. I think it does more than just draw a card in your typical Warrior build, so I'm a fan of that, but I know a lot of people have been trying out the Upstart Goblin, so interesting to see that here, especially in 3rd place. And we also have a copy of Mind Control in the main with no copy of Gravekeeper Spy. I know this is a bit of a debated topic of whether this can actually fit in the Warrior deck in the main, but kind of interesting. Our earlier list that had 3 spies in the main didn't main the Mind Control. It cited it, but our list here with no Gravekeeper Spies has the Mind Control in the main.
I think you could even make an argument for Mindcon being better in the main deck than the side deck when going up against Turbo, because in game 1, Turbo will still have all their Night Assailants and Decos. Which post-side they reduce them or completely side them out. Yeah, there's no Gravekeeper to capitalize off of that, but there's, you know, post-side you still have that option.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. Maybe we should be playing a Gravekeeper's Guard here. Maybe up the spice level a little bit. Looking at the traps, we have only 1 copy of Sakuretsu armor, which is a little interesting. That's pretty unusual. Normally you see 2. In the Warrior list, we also only have 1 copy of Dust Tornado, and we have all 3 copies of Trap Dust Shoot.
Yeah, I think the Sakuretsu being just at 1 is kind of the same reason why Mindcon is here. I think this is just a meta call trying to pre for Turbo as much as you can.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Getting to the side deck, we're gonna leave the last card for last, of course. We've got the 1-1 ratio of King Tiger to Asura Priest. I love that. We have the Mobius with 3 copies of Gravekeeper Spy. We have the 1-1 Kinetic Soldier and Zambara. Couple of walks. We do have Sakuretsu Armor number 2 and 3, so no Widespread Ruin. We have the 2nd Tornado, and then maybe even a little bit more easy to slay you influence. We have 2 copies of Royal Oppression. Big fan of this card. I know this card is talked about as being basically just unplayable in GOAT format, but I've seen it do some good stuff. It takes out Scapegoats. It can take out RGT if they don't have an answer to it. What do you think about Oppression, Grumple?
I feel like it's only really good against Reasoning Gate. Like, for example, let's say we're playing against Turbo. That deck has 3 special summons, the 2 Sorcerers and the BLS, and if this card is already out, then you don't summon them. So, like, if anything, it like delays 3 cards in that matchup. It doesn't do much. Against Reasoning Gate, there's obviously way more because you can negate Reasoning and Monster Gate. But even then, like, 1 True Nate and they just do their thing anyway, and they always use True Nate before they start their combo. So I'm not sure how strong that card really is.
I'm not super sold on it. I know I've talked to Easy to Slay You quite a bit about the card. It's definitely not one that I'm sold on, but man, I love seeing the spice, and I like seeing it here. We are about to get on to the finalists here, and in 2nd place, we have the deck that should prey on Warriors. We have our first Chaos Control deck. of the top 8 here in second place. Fabio Minicozzi bringing some spice here in this control deck as well. We've got Zaborg. Haven't seen that one in a while. And we have Dark Mimic level 1. Love to see the Lunchbox back in some lists.
Yeah. Let's start with the Zaborg. I feel like Zaborg just doesn't make sense here. Like the whole advantage that CC has over regular control is that it can play the Thunder Dragons, so it doesn't have to play dedicated tribute monster to get rid of Tear if it needs to. Zaborg just doesn't feel necessary. Then there's you can't talk about the Night Sense as well because we don't have that many flips, and especially since we're missing Spy. Like Spy is just so much better than Night Assailant. Let's play that instead, okay? The Mimic I actually kinda like by now. I think the base idea at some point was just that you have basically a worse deco that can be used as meta fodder. I think what's more interesting about it is that it's a deco that still stays in the deck when you get knocked, so you can get away with like a lower monster count.
Yeah,
I think there's something there. I'm more favorable towards it than I used to be. Hold on, this is another Torrent main deck without Mirror Force.
it sure is.
Wait, and is that Drageki Break at 2? Is that a 41 card deck with 2 upstarts and 3 jars?
I was about to bring that up. It sure is a 41 card deck with 2 upstarts and 3 jars.
Oh well.
I think that's a good reaction to that. What do you think about 3 Scapegoat, 3 Metamorphosis ratio?
I think it's okay. I'm personally a fan of Creature Swap, but it probably works. I'm more interested also in the side deck. There's some interesting stuff going on there.
Some very interesting stuff going here. We have a Sasuke in the side, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
You don't see that a whole lot.
It doesn't seem very necessary, does it?
It doesn't. This deck doesn't have a spy problem, right?
Not really. Like, maybe the idea is that sometimes you side out the Borg and then you can get into kind of a light problem. But even if you do, you still have the same light ratio as the regular Turbo does.
Right.
So you should be okay.
Yeah, and you're not playing Rhoda or anything to search it up, so that's kind of interesting. Speaking of Rhoda targets, we have 3 copies of Zombra the Dark to go along with Deck Devastation Virus.
I think the big question is how strong is DDV? How strong is it really?
Right.
Does it auto win against Turbo? Does it, or is it just okay?
Unfortunately, in the right matchup, Deck Devi does do a whole lot of damage, but I think you're right. Against Turbo, it's just not the auto win that you really need it to be. As much as I like the card and as spicy as it is, you could probably find something, I don't know, a little bit better. But I guess if you're going to play a bunch of Zombras for your Warrior matchup and you really want to own control or something, I guess you could just throw it in there if you wanted to be spicy or you just had an extra sideboard slot open.
Yeah, but then you also have to play Zombiras against Turbo or Control, and it's not good in either matchup.
Yeah. I guess I would agree with that as well, because looking at the main deck, you only have Chaos Sorcerers as the way to proc it. So yeah, you are sort of, bringing in some cards that might not be ideal in a matchup to use a card that's not an auto win. So unfortunately for Deck Devi, maybe some better choices. I think it's interesting to point out the last thing here in the side deck. We have Breaker in the side, but not in the main. That's not a usual thing, right?
Nah, I don't think it is, but I think sometimes we stick to these staple cards a little too much. I think Breaker is a card that can definitely be moved to the side in some instances. I don't think it's too bad of a thing.
And moving on to our first place list, we have Fabrizio Aguilar here playing Warriors. So Warrior taking down yet another event this season. You absolutely love to see it. Looking at the list here, we do not have the Moth or the Spies in the main, but we do have pretty standard Warrior lineup from there. Triple Blade Knight, double Kaiku. We have the 1 Spirit Reaper, so that's going to be our 14th monster here. We do see the Mind Control in the main again without the Spies. Looking at everything else in this list, this might be the most standard Warrior main I think that we've seen outside of the Mind Control and the Spirit Reaper, but even then, those are played cards in Warrior.
Might be part of the reason why it won.
Could be true. Sometimes if you stick to what wins, you win.
Interesting concept.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
Okay, in the side deck, I think the only interesting thing in the side deck is really that Cliff over Amazonas Archer, but I think it can make sense with the double Vok being included. Those probably also being there because time is an issue IRL. So Vok is often more common than it is online. Everybody plays Vok every time, but you don't see multiples of Vok usually in your online deck lists.
Yeah, looks like this duelist may have taken a little bit more of the approach of, I'll, bring in the King Tigers and hope they're good enough against the Ojama trio, but I'll focus a little bit more on taking out those pesky floodgates. And so we have the Cliff and a Mobius to go with it. So I've definitely played some sideboards like this in the Warrior deck. I don't hate it, but I do love Archer as well, so I like to see that in the side. From there, we have our first Magician of Faith in the side. I know a lot of people do like to side this in Warriors. People siding out their Nox and the likes. Magician of Faith can become a lot more potent. We do see a couple of Gravekeeper Spies and the Morphing Jars back. So, couple, actually, like 4 or 5 decks in this top 8 with Morphing Jar, somewhere in the 55.
Yeah, I really think that Morphing Jar is going to move on to be a staple in the side for Warrior. It's just so strong. It's almost like a Moth where a flip in the right situation can just win you the game on its own. And it's just a card that doesn't have a counter if you're playing against Warrior post-side, because you've sided out all the counters, unless you expected this. But even then, like, for example, if your opponent has 1 Morphing Jar in the entire deck, do you really keep your Nox just for that 1 Morphing Jar? Or do you just hope that you don't see it?
Right. Definitely not worth keeping the Nox in, at least in my opinion. So, from the Warrior side, the only, you don't ever have to worry about those Nox or the level 2. You just have to worry about, positioning the card right, playing it at the right time, and yeah, pays dividends for sure.
Play Warrior, be happy.
Get your helmets on. Warrior out here, winning everything. All right, well, that is going to be the top 8. Congrats to Fabrizio for taking this event down. Shout out to all 158 players that showed up to this event in Milan. The Italians always put on great events. They always have great players. They always bring the spice. Absolutely love to see it. Congratulations to the rest of the top 4 as well for receiving a Worlds invite. Grumple, do you have anything else to say before we get out of here?
I don't think so.
All right, that's it for us. We'll be back with the next one.